This is part 1 of Rhythm and Texture lecture. First, we're going to talk about rhythm. Okay, first off, we're going to talk about kinesthetic empathy. So we've talked about this before. We talked about it previously in the illusion of motion lecture, but we're going to talk about it again with rhythm. So kinesthetic empathy is a mental process in which the viewer consciously or unconsciously recreates or feels an action or motion he or she only observes. So in this image on the right called The Insect Chorus by Charles E. Birchfield, we see that there's kind of this roof in the background and then what appears to be all these really kind of flowing and moving bushes that are surrounding it. So rhythmic structures are often described in visual art and designed the same way that they are in music vocabulary. So visual art kind of steals its terms from music vocabulary, so just remember that. But we can really kind of feel the vibration of these, the chirping that could possibly be happening from these insects that are coming out of the bushes around this house. It's more of a feeling that we're recreating or some sort of action or motion. So yeah, kinesthetic empathy. All right, rhythm. So rhythm is an element of design based on repetition of recurrent motifs. So in this piece on the right by Bridget Riley called Olive Added to Red and Blue, Violet and Green, Single Reverse Diagonal from 1979, we see there's kind of this, it looks like flowing fabric or like a music floating on the wind or I don't know, but it's kind of these recurring motifs that create this kind of pattern that makes us feel like there's some sort of progression going on. There's some sort of movement from one place to another, but repetition is the biggest thing. All right, pattern. Okay, so we have, pattern has multiple forms, but often it's non-objective. It can be objective as well, but non-objective is a type of artwork with absolutely no reference to or representation of the natural work. So the artwork is the reality. So in this, again, second piece by Bridget Riley called Bagatelle, number 1, we see these triangles that seem to be kind of floating in the wind. Maybe they're water that's kind of flowing. I kind of picture people dancing in a choreographed dance. I don't know. But it's all things that I'm creating in my mind. I'm comparing it to. There's no one thing that I can say that it is. It's kind of unto its own self. So just a little backstory that I thought was interesting. Bagatelle, which is the title of the piece, is a game in which small balls are hit and then allowed to roll down a sloping board on which there are holes, each numbered with score achieved if a ball goes into it, with pins acting as obstructions. Never heard of that game, but so interesting. You can almost see the kind of checkerboard idea of a game and a playing board and movement happening in an orderly fashion. Bagatelle also means a thing of little importance, a very easy task. So this is a really simplified version of anything. It's just triangles, black and white. So I don't know. I thought that was an interesting backstory. Shapes and repetition. So this is an example of a representational or objective rhythm. We can see that these are dunes. So this piece is called Dune Ridges at Sunrise, Death Valley. It's a photograph by Bruce Brownham. So this is an example of legato, a connecting or flowing rhythm. So these dunes are all one piece and they seem to flow together. I can kind of connect them and roll them back and forth in my mind, and they're receding into the background but kind of all connected as one. So there's definitely a flowing kind of really peaceful feeling to them. All right, another types of pattern and sequences. This is alternating rhythm, so a rhythm that consists of successive patterns in which the same elements reappear in a regular order. The motifs alternate consistently with one another to produce a regular and anticipated sequence. So in this piece by Edna Andrada, we see that there's kind of these cube spaces, but the only thing that's really changing is the pink and the red dot. If we go back and forth, they sort of alternate from one square to another, and it creates this kind of movement, that alternation. If it were kind of the same, you would just kind of see it as one image, but because those two dots are alternating in this really kind of anticipated pattern, I almost kind of feel like there's like a little dance going on, like cha-cha, cha-cha. I don't know. So the interchange is the name of this piece, which is a great name. Okay. Pattern and sequence. So this is another example of rhythm. So this is vibrating colors. So colors that create a flickering effect at their border. This effect usually depends on equal visual relationships and strong hue contrast. So hue is another synonym for color. So we've gone through our color section already. So we know that vibrating colors are often complementary colors. So in this piece by Edna Andrada, entitled Orange Blocks, we see that there are orange blocks and these sort of teal blocks, and they kind of are actually the same hue value across the board, but the background colors are changing. There's kind of this fade from green to orange, and so depending on what the background color is, that cube really changes. And I don't know, I see this rolling tide or rolling wave. There's definitely some movement going back and forth, but it has to do with the vibrancy of those colors. So vibrating colors, very interesting way to make a pattern or sequence. All right, converging patterns. So we're going to talk about progressive rhythm. Progressive rhythm is a repetition of shape that changes in a regular pattern. So on the right, we have this photograph by Ed Ruscha. It's called Goodyear Tires, 6610 Laurel Canyon, North Hollywood from 1967. This is from a short book that Ed Ruscha made called 43 Parking Lots in Los Angeles. So what we see over here is a parking lot of a Goodyear tire. There's no cars in it. It's empty. And so there's kind of a pattern or a structure that's laid out, which is just the parking spots themselves. But the progressive rhythm is actually the dark spots within those parking spots. So you see as the spots get closer to the store, the spots that people have probably parked in more, there's more oil stains within that parking spot, and it makes it darker. So there's kind of this almost like value shift. So it's a lighter value to a darker value from one side to another. So this rhythm is kind of, it's changing. It's a pattern that changes and kind of grows. So it gets from lighter to dark. All right, converging patterns. So this is another type of progressive rhythm, but it's an inherent rhythm. So most progressive rhythms that you're going to come across are found in nature. So they can be imitated, like we saw in the last one. That's sort of a natural one as well, but it's also a man-made thing. But there's so many examples of inherent rhythm or progressive rhythm in nature. So in flowers and plants, in this case, an artichoke heart or a halved artichoke photograph. So we see that there's kind of this small little triangle at the very center, and it gets larger and larger as the leaves of the artichoke kind of grow up around it. So there's lots of pattern right there. There's a rhythm of growth that we can see, but it's very natural in its progression. Okay, Louise Bourgeois is kind of recreating that progressive or inherent rhythm in this piece called Partial Recall from 1979. So it kind of looks like a scalloped wooden fence, very typical, but as it goes back in space, it gets larger. It almost starts to look like clouds or something in the background, but there's definitely a sequence from front to back, and we can kind of see that progression. All right, final type of rhythm, contrasting rhythm. So we have an example here of polyrhythmic rhythm, and this is a complex pattern employing more than one rhythm or beat. So in the last piece by Louise Bourgeois, it was kind of one movement going back and forth, repeating shapes. This one by Alan Crockett, called Hoot Alan, there's lots of different kind of sequences that we see over here. So there's kind of the lines through the center, there's the scrubbly spots, there's kind of these layers of these different moments, but they all come together to kind of create like almost this like jazz song or something like that. There's just lots of different sounds and beats and patterns going on that are coming together to make a more complex rhythm or beat. All right, this is also an example of polyrhythmic or contrasting rhythm, but it's a little bit more orderly. So in this piece by John Moore called Post, we can see that there's all these different panes of window and glass, and then there's fences behind it, and then different buildings. There's lots of different space, and each one of them feels to be a different place. So there's different types of rhythm, different types of movement and pattern in here, but they come together to form this kind of complex rhythm.